Right, whenever you're ready, Claire.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Finance Committee. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Do we have any apologies, Liz?
Apologies from Roger, Andy Smith, Dan McDonald, and Sarah. Couldn't make it either.
Thank you very much. Okay, so declaration of interests. We have to do the usual form thing, so I'll go first. I'm Claire Williams, a councillor of Liss Parish Council and a member of the Finance Committee. I've read the agenda and have no interest to declare in any of the items that are being discussed this evening. Keith?
Yeah, I'm Councillor Keith Budden. I'm a member of the Parish Council Finance Committee. I've read the agenda and I have no interest to declare in any of the items this evening.
Thank you. Nick?
I'm Councillor Nick Wilson, member of the Finance Committee. I've read the agenda and I have no interest to declare on any of the items.
Thanks, Nick. Howard?
I'm Howard Lindsley. I'm a member of Liss Parish Council. I am a member of the Finance Committee. I have interest in that I'm a trustee of Newman Collard playing fields, and I am also a trustee of Lake Village Hall. If anything else comes in, I will declare to the time. Both of those are non-pecuniary interests, though.
Thanks, Howard. And for the record, I'll also note that Liz Ford is in attendance as the RFO. So, the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of November 2020. Does anybody have anything they'd like to note in terms of accuracy? Howard?
Yeah. Just a bit of paper I've done it on. I've got one or two things that I need to say. Oh, sorry about this. I'm panicking over the other stuff. I've lost that bit of paper. Okay, I can make it up. Anyway, right. On the second page, there is, on 11 Fin 20, there's, right at the end of it, there's the date of the January council meeting. I think it should be the 18th. And there's a minute reference, and I don't know what that minute reference is.
Can you update those, Liz?
The reason is the minutes were written in November before those meetings had taken place. So
that's fine. Can you update this?
You want me to put the dates of the meetings? Okay.
Yeah, just for completeness, will you update them?
Will do.
Thank you.
Right. And then if we come towards the bottom of the page 3, between the last two paragraphs, the penultimate one is the parish council had published. The last one is a decision was made. Between those, I'll read this out fairly slowly. Councillor Lindsley formally proposed that the application by Lake Village Hall was now fully received. You ready?
Yep, go on.
And that it should be considered alongside or considered at the meeting alongside the other grant requests. And then, you ready? During the discussion, somebody, I don't know who it was, pointed out that the Heart Trust would also need to be excluded if Great Village Hall was excluded. And then Councillor Lindsley accepted this as an amendment, adding the Heart Trust to his motion. Okay, that's it for that one. And
Is
I
that an
don't-
amendment? Is that an amendment?
yes,
I know
To
that
the
you're
minutes.
proposing it, Howard, but is it
I-
an amendment?
I don't have a problem with that as an amendment. Do other members take any exception to that? Amendment then, please.
right. And the other one on Appendix A, if you compare Rake Village Hall with the Liss Heart Trust, one says there's no application, the other gives a date for an application received. That there must be consistency on those.
Sorry, Howard, the no application was regarding the playground. And that was to correspond with the 2021 grant award process.
Right, okay, thanks so much. Yes, I apologise for that.
So you're happy to that table to stand?
Yep, sorry, I didn't read it carefully enough. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Nick?
I know that I couldn't actually find where Howard was referring to in the minutes. I looked at the bottom of page 3, but what's the effect of it? Just so before we are asked to approve the minutes?
Sorry, Howard, go ahead.
Okay, the effect of it is that I did propose a motion at that point, and I had got involved with this when I realised that no application had been received from Rake Village Hall. I don't know what went wrong entirely, but I think an out-of-date email was used, but I don't know, and I haven't really talked in detail of that because I didn't think it appropriate. So, and I promised them I would, if they would get an application in to the RFO before the meeting, I would propose at the meeting that be included. And I did say to them at that stage, that's what's happened before. People have been happy with that, but I can't promise that will work. And as there's other things I've told them which have turned out not to be true, I think it's important for my credibility that I did do what I promised to do.
I see. Thank you.
It doesn't change the outcome of the minute, because the sentence after Howard's proposal says that a decision was made that the only grants that are going to be accepted are ones that were submitted before the deadline. So it's additional narrative rather than changing anyone's understanding of what the minute says.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any items that they would like to note for accuracy on the minutes? In that case, can I have a proposer, please? Nick? And a seconder, please? Keith? All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? Nobody. Good. Right. So that moves us on to item 4, which is to review the financial documentation. And I will hand that over to Liz to take us through the accounts as we have them.
Part of doing this was to look at the annual return figures, which need to be approved for submission to the external auditor. And this was brought forward due to the closing date for virtual meetings. Last one can be had on the 6th of May, which has changed how I've approached the accounts. So the only part of the accounts available for review this evening are the main accounts spreadsheet, which look at the comparison of income and expenditure against the different budget categories and give a record of how LIS has spent its money in the past financial year. I had wanted this to be completely finished and the accompanying balance sheet to be finished, which would then generate the numbers for the AGAR, the annual return. But I have been having a struggle with the balance sheet, which I think is now resolved, but obviously much too late for this meeting. I do think there is some value in going through this account statement so that councillors can understand where we've kept within budget limits or overspent during the year. And just so while you're here, you can get a feel for what the accounts are saying. If you are happy to do that, we can go ahead and have a quick review of those account numbers.
I'm happy to do that. Everybody else?
Yes, could I just ask a question? I'm sure I'll kick myself when I hear the answer. The word Bausch is mentioned several times, and I don't know what it means.
It's a contraction of balance sheet.
Ah, right. Thank you.
No problem.
So it's obvious when you know.
Accountants tend to do things in a shorthand.
To fit into spreadsheets as well. So if we look at it, it's structured in a few big sections. You've got general admin costs, which include staff costs. You've got ground spending. You've got the donations, which LIS carries out. That's the third big section. And then you've got the final one before we look at expenditure of all the what are called the special items, which includes all the capital projects and other project spending through the year that's arisen. So if you go back to page 1, you can see the column which is budget 2021, and then you've got the actual expenditure in the year, the financial year. So if we focus on those two, and then we can elaborate on the variance at times. So if you look at staff costs, the total budget for all staff costs after receiving contribution from the charities was 70,136. That was the budget, and the actual spend was 67,736.21. Partly that was because quite a generous provision was made in the event of a annual payment award, which was yet to be decided when the budget was set for 2021. It was roughly 2.5%, and I think a provision had been made in the budget for 7% in the end. So even though we had a bit of a change in paying national insurance contributions, the parish council was still within budget. Yeah,
and that's as a result of the national pay awards for local authorities being mandated. It's not something that we have any control over. The government decides what government employee pay rises are. Sorry, Liz.
Fine. Insurances slightly above budget, 4316. I think we've increased it for the next year's budget, so that's okay, but there was a slight increase in insurance payment. Councillors' expenses well within budget at 7155 versus 210, and that generally covers mileage for officers, a little bit for a couple of meetings by councillors as well. Quite a big category which covers subscriptions to HALC, and then also the website costs, software costs for the payroll software. The new accounting system will be later, and all the different stationery costs of the office. So that's quite a big expenditure. Again, after contribution from the charities, that was well within budget. Telephone and internet, these numbers are a bit not correct because the telephone is actually paid through the charities account now. through one contract. So that's a repayment to the charities accounts. So the numbers for the telephone and internet aren't correct, but the costs are within budget. Postage is significantly less than previously. After contributions from the charities, we are in a surplus. We get more money from the charities than we spend on postage. I think that's partly because how we make payments has changed. So making much less payments of cheques. It has been slightly bigger this last year because obviously with offices being home-based, more posting is being done, but that's still okay. Audits were slightly more expensive than expected, but that's covered by the new budget. Chairman's expenses within limits, copier again within limits, and then we had some unexpected expenditure for capital items, repair and maintenance, which previously wasn't really in the budget, but has been added now during the year to comply with the new accounting system. And there were some pack testing and other costs there, which have caused this excess of 599. Office equipment within budget, training within budget, village voice costs. At the moment, that's not being done, but the 159 was the COVID leaflet that was produced last year. So for the total staff and admin costs, we are within budget by 9,767.15. So that's quite safe. Go over to grounds.
This is a pattern that is going to continue throughout all of the accounts, and it seems to be weirdly prevalent across every single set of accounts I've seen in the last year. COVID has meant that people spend less money. So with all of the offices shut and people working from home, and also the effect of not so much on the parish council, but the effect of furlough has meant that there's less staffing being done. We've spent less money as a nation, I think, in the last 12 months. Sorry, Liz.
No, good. Makes it a bit more interesting before everyone goes to sleep with all these categories. If I just pick out the main ones, no money was spent on casual labour in the last year. That was partly because the spare resource from the existing offices associated with grounds is being used where necessary. And as Claire said, there's been less outside activity in the last year.
How did we manage to save so much on grass cutting?
A dry year, that's partly what it is. And also that reflects that the budget originally put in there is very generous, but it's been carried forward because with the Mill Road Garden coming online possibly next year, there'll be more grass cutting. So it's, I think the grass cutting contract only started in 1920. So in some ways we were still feeling our way as to how much it was going to cost.
Yeah.
Play equipment and repairs within budget. Playground inspection, well within budget. Going back to, I think a key thing was the overall vehicle costs. I think they were a bit higher due to repairs to the Land Rover. List conservation rangers, a key item, Keith, is that EHDC for the last 2 years, even though I've been emailing them, haven't made any contribution to the LCR costs. I'll keep chasing them. Village planting, which is the Listen Bloom activity in the village, which also includes all the hanging basket works. Their expenditure was very low, even though they did some works, but even then their fundraising was still at a healthy level at 116.
I'm sorry, Liz, can I ask everybody to remember the £482.76 underspend on budget in Listen Bloom when we get to item 8 in the agenda, to just keep it in mind.
Okay. Sundries, pitch waste and other grounds was overspent. That is a big catch-all thing. There was quite a lot of work for mending the fencing at the tennis court, and also both new dog waste and memorial bench works going in. So there were some costs associated with that. That is quite a hard one to control, and it's probably worth having a discussion with Sarah and Paul Nibbs as to how spending is organised. And then both tree works and hedge cutting were well within limits. So we then got the grant budget, which
Chair, are we taking them item by item, or do you want to wait till the end?
I don't mind if everybody interrupts when they have a question, as long as it's okay with Liz.
It wasn't a question, it was just an observation about the maintenance cost of the Land Rover. Sarah and I and Paul are of the view that the time may be coming when we should think of replacing it. It has an intrinsic value because it is a vintage, Land Rovers now are appreciating, but we're waiting to see exactly how long the garage is at the Crownsman's hut, because there's no point buying a vehicle that won't fit into the garage. But ideally, Paul wants a longer vehicle. It would be more useful if it was longer. So there will come a moment, in which case, hopefully, we'll buy something that's more reliable.
A modern vehicle, perhaps.
Well, not too modern and not too expensive.
And I know from conversations that were had in the last year that the Land Rover has held its value incredibly well for what's a second-hand vehicle. So that's promising.
Yes, we're not planning to go into speculative Land Rover buying to any positive purpose.
Thanks, Nick.
Now we do well on our ground vehicles. I mean, the Land Rover's held its value. The tractor, I'm sure, in real terms, probably increased its value over the umpteen years that we had it. So
one thing we're very good at is buying vehicles.
Perhaps we should go into business and cut the council tax.
Yeah. Yes.
Actually, vehicles like that, if they're kept outside, if the hut's not big enough, I think sometimes it's actually better for them because they tend to rust less. Because if you take a wet vehicle and put it in a nice garage, that's when it tends to rust. And and I know some bus companies deliberately keep their buses out in the open because they find the bodywork lasts longer.
Yeah. It seems really strange to be having this conversation in sleepy little Hampshire hamlets, but locking things up at night might be a better idea than leaving them indoors sometimes.
That is a good point.
certainly with the preponderance of how often you see stolen Land Rovers,
Yeah. Anyway,
I'll withdraw that comment then. Obviously, the council's in good control for making profits on them.
Thanks, Liz.
Okay. Grants. Obviously, that's the grants to the parish council charities which are paid, and also the two big grant tranches, the grants agreed in the budget setting and the additional donations during the year for unexpected requests. There is still £100 payment outstanding, Keith, which is either for your LG&H Friendship Fund or it's for List Men's Shed or List Village Club. And Pedder at List Village Club isn't so easy to contact. So somebody's payments zoomed back to the parish council.
that might be the Friendship Fund.
Yes.
Because we changed our bank account, I think. So that might be the reason. I'll double check on that list, but that could well be the Friendship Fund. So we changed our because we were with Nationwide and then we moved to NatWest, but NatWest for some reason Nationwide don't seem to be very good at telling anybody where to send the payment. So they assured us it would all be done automatically, and it hasn't.
Okay, I had asked a couple of times, but okay, fine.
I will get those details to you.
The other donations, only £76 was spent of the 3,400 budget in 2021, and that was the CPRE membership and the RBL, both of which are donations.
So where have we got to? I've got lost.
Okay, so
We're on page 3.
page 3.
Yeah.
So we've just summarised the donations.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, with COVID and shutdown, things are pretty quiet on the grant application front. There had been a grant application in from Liz Hart Charity Trust, but that was deferred because the meeting was deferred. My fault there, so that was not discussed. That's in a later item. And then projects, which is quite interesting because it also gives a record with all the SIL, SDNPA and other grant donations towards project spending in LIS. So if you go through there, you can see the Pavilion Improved Accessibility Pathworks. The cost was 8497, and we had section 106 from the National Park Authority covering the cost of that. Loan servicing is a standard payment each year. We had a further section 106 in the National Park of 6,365 for playground equipment. Now, I do know some playground works have been carried out, but the final invoicing is still outstanding. I've not received any information on that. So I will check on that because it's an income expenditure item, see if I need to include that in the accounts. We've got the Petanque course, which was built again with money from the I've not put who that's from. It's dropped off. That's either the National Park or EHDC. Okay.
It's
I think
National Park.
it was
Yes.
the National Park.
Yeah.
And I think that might have been a grant application. And then also the List Forest residents donation of £600. Thank you very much. Then there was some traffic calming works refer to the repair and upgrade of the speed indicator device, and it was resolved to use the reserve for the traffic calming for those works. There was no allocated budget for that. And then the village centre improvement project, it was authorised to allocate 10,000 of the general reserves to that project, but there's been no expenditure yet. So that's something to consider in carrying over an unallocated reserve into 21-22. Christmas tree lights, they were there ticking over, tiny level. Generally, it seems to be of the order of less than £50 a year. The next couple of rows are all not emboldened because there's been no activity for there. Oops. And then the flood, I don't know who this is, but the dog's barking at somebody. Flood management, a budget, capital project budget in 2021 of 1,000, which hasn't been spent. And then drainage improvements for the Newman Collard playing field. We had a section 106 project, which had a surplus amount, but that also covered the fee with Southern Water, which was covered in 1920. Was there. And page 5, the village hall toilets have been refurbished as a capital project, with a large amount of the monies being covered by grant receipts, 15,000, and other monies approved from reserves. And then council room improvements, that was £400 for the new laptop, and £4,275 has been spent on new accounting software of a reserve allocation of 5,226 approved at a meeting. So that's basically all the projects but spending last year.
So in summary, what we've got is, if you see at the bottom of page 3, we've got a variance of £20,238.40. That is the amount of surplus we have on the precept funded items. So the things that the precept was going to fund other than project work. And a lot of that is going to be because we just didn't spend money in the financial year. And then on top of that, our reserves have moved positively by about £20,000, and that'd be a combination of projects that have been done and things that we just didn't spend that we expected to.
So could I just be, to understand that, does that mean that the full 40,349 will be added to reserve, or just the 20,000?
If you have a project which is ongoing, the allocated reserve continues.
So it's against that heading?
Yes. If a
Right.
project has finished, generally any monies in surplus go into the general reserve. And then what I'm proposing is that council can also resolve, when it approves the accounts at the next meeting, that some monies are continued as an allocated reserve.
Yeah.
And that's
So
of relevance, for instance, the Listen Bloom village planting type thing. But previously there hasn't been any formal confirmation of what the reserves are at the beginning of the year, apart from a list in the balance sheet, which has been a little bit all over the place. So I'm just suggesting that we get it formally confirmed. And key with an allocated reserve and general reserve is you still have to go to council meeting to approve spending from that. But it does give an indication, and it already starts the process of getting monies available for works.
So could I just have a follow-up question, which is very broadly, a ballpark figure, knowing that you had still been working on the balance sheet, what would be the net effect on our reserves, roughly, from the past years?
There is a number at the end, and we'll get to it when we do the income and expenditure, if I can find the right page. If you go to
Page
page
six.
6, you can see there's a row which is movement on reserves.
Yeah.
At the moment, we're talking about an increase in reserves, both total of allocated and general, of approximately 46,000. There's a couple of numbers out there, but that's the sort of ballpark figure.
Yeah.
The reason I'm asking is just to, when we are looking at something like the village hall roof overhaul, one option is to consider that as a candidate for SIL funding. But my instinct, and this is, I'm not wanting to debate it in this forum, but my instinct is it would be more appropriate to take it out of reserves, because it is an ongoing part of maintaining our assets rather than adding something new to the community. So it's just useful to know that our reserves are more healthy at the end of this year, this past year, than they were at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. And while we don't have sight of what the charity accounts look like, I expect the same pattern will have developed there as well. I imagine the charity accounts will be in surplus for the year too.
Yes. The income from business grant support,
yeah,
includes the projected income that we use for budget figures. So the expenditure has reduced slightly in some cases, but we are going to be in surplus.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
So in all things told, financially, it has been a really healthy year for us under some really difficult and trying circumstances, thanks largely in part to help from the government. Okay.
So just going through the final balances, we've got obviously the precept has been received in total 218,208. Lowish level of bank account interest 57.87, because we're relying on the Lloyd's deposit accounts interest. SIL receipts, there's a higher level of SIL receipts. These are ones which are not put against specific projects. So these are unallocated SIL receipts, a further 9,000. And we've also got this grant, which aren't netted, 143.99. Check that number. Because, oh, that came in, that's just because it's not listed. That was a grant from Keith Budden. Thank you for COVID costs for reopening of the village hall. And then the VAT refund is in there. Okay, just going through those. I'm not sure. Oh, that one's been taken out in the final balance sheet. That's why I'm querying it. So lower down, because parish council accounts aren't allowed to use netted items for the income and expenditure, where we've taken off all those grant awards against different budgets, you have to add them back in for the total income and the total expenditure. So in other words, the total income is 256,148.56, and the total expenditure is 302,476. It's the way round, sorry. So income exceeds expenditure, which is where you get that positive movement on your reserves. Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully that gives you a bit more understanding of what the table means. And then I need to get out the balance sheet, and based on that, the AGAR things ASAP, and I also need to get the charity accounts. Charity accounts, if they're not there in time for review before the weekend, it's not essential for them to be approved next Wednesday, but I will endeavour to get them moved forward. Obviously, I have to look at them in relation to how they affect the parish council accounts.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions on the numbers as just presented by Liz? Or is your brain now completely mush from all of the numbers?
Howard's got his hand up.
Sorry, Howard?
Yeah, I think my brain is mushed, so I'll ask a simple question.
Those are the best ones.
There's not a good place to do this. The development on Anglers Ash Road, we're due some sill from them. Now, I notice when I walk past there that there's one house looks as though it's already occupied, and there's several are down that got a notice on the front saying sold. What are the criteria, if anybody knows, for when they have to start paying us CIL?
I know that we have received two quite sizable chunks of it, but we received them after the end of the financial year. I think we've received somewhere in the region of £270,000 or something like that. Lots. Yeah, we've received lots.
So they're ahead of the game, it sounds like, in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they had to pay some amount to the National Park when the first house was occupied, but then the National Park only pay us twice a year. Is that right? I think.
My memory is that they've paid something like 130 in April, and they're due to pay another 130 in September. Have I got that wrong? I thought that was.
I think that's right. Yeah. I think. Well,
So,
to say
Roger,
again, I think that's when we get the payment from the National Park. I think Carl will pay it ahead of that. But yeah.
Yeah. So Roger is proposing a meeting of the project review group, I think in June, when we can sort of take stock of that and consider priorities and engaging the community in helping us, finalise our sort of thinking on priorities. I think, if I may just sort of pick up on what Howard was saying, it will be quite useful at that meeting of BRG to have a bit of a sort of philosophical discussion about what should come out of SIL and what should come out of reserves.
And what we should seek other external funding for.
Indeed, yeah. Because I mean, SIL is supposed to be, as I understand it, to actually enhance in ways, in a sense, to reflect the fact the community has accepted this development. So I think that we'll probably we need to categorise, and I quite agree. In some cases, it may be possible to apply for grants from other sources.
Yeah, and of course, theoretically, we're supposed to indicate some relationship between the new development and what we spend the SIL on.
Yeah.
Was that more for section 106?
Sorry?
They used to have very strict requirements for section 106.
Yeah, it's not as strict as 106, but you still have to say why you're doing it. So, give an example. If the if there was a development, I don't know. If we do a very small example, but if we do the example of the houses that were built where the Bluebell used to be out at West List, it'd be very hard to justify spending that seal money at the top of Hill Brow. Because it'd be hard to justify that one was a reflection of the other. Now with Andrews Ash, that's not so difficult because it's a big development, so therefore the impact felt right across the village. So it's
I suppose what I'm thinking is it'd be quite useful in a way to give PRG a steer if our chair of this committee would agree that we do need to have a look at that. Because we've got healthy reserves, we've got certainly unprecedented access to SIL, and there are other grants available, and we need to consider it in the round rather than say, oh, it's all SIL, because we've suddenly got SIL.
Yeah.
We need to spend it very wisely on behalf of the community. So if Liz was able to, if Claire, if you agree,
I do.
to reflect that in the minutes, that PRG will need to look at the criteria for those three sources of investment.
Yeah, with a little bit of mindfulness thrown in my year and a half on the council, there's always been two blockers to some of our quite ambitious wishes for the village. It's money and time. We seem to have resolved quite a lot of the money problem, but the time thing still remains exactly the same. So it needs to be achievable and deliverable with the people we have without breaking anybody.
Or, sorry, just to build on that, being prepared, say, to use something out of reserves to pay for buying in someone else's time, where the rules of the other funding sources might not allow it. i.e., we need to enable good things to happen as well as pay for the good things themselves.
Agreed. Okay, so if nobody has any objections, we'll move on to item 5 in the agenda, which is to consider 2 grant applications from the Lishart Charity Trust.
So, Chair, did we have to make a recommendation to council about that last item?
I don't think so, because it's still kind of incomplete.
Oh, right, okay. I thought that was why we were taking it tonight, because it had to be ready for council next week. Whatever it is. Yeah. Okay.
The key bit is that's the most complicated part. The next sheets are just summary totals in relation to bank balances carried forward, so that is more straightforward to so hopefully, having gone through that in detail, it should make it easier at the next meeting.
Okay, so item 5, the grant application from the Lishart Charity Trust. I have to admit, I am confused as to whether these are one grant applications or 2, because while the handwriting is slightly different on each of them, the narrative is exactly the same.
There are 2 grant applications. One is for 2021 and one is for 21-22. Handwriting. Okay. Not a problem. The Lishart Charity Trust, I think, were contacted in autumn last year when councillors were endeavouring to widen the range of applicants who submitted grant applications. That process was obviously still going on, so this application came in after the 30th of September deadline. The application for 2021 was actually submitted for the grant tranche to be paid in 21-22, was a problem with the form dates. That often happens with the grant applications. They put the wrong form in, but it was put forward for approval for 2021-22 payment. As we've discussed in the minutes earlier, the Liss Heart Charity Trust and the Rake Village Hall grant applications, it was resolved that since they came after the deadline, they would not be paid in the, or they would not be included in the budget allocation for 21-22, but there was still a provision in the budget for ad hoc applications during that financial year. I went back to Rake Village Hall and also to Liss Heart Charity Trust, and at that time Liss Heart Charity Trust confirmed to me that they would like an ad hoc application to go forward for payment in 2021 as well. So that's why there are these two grant applications. They were being put forward, but they weren't considered.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Can I
consider
clarify
this.
that,
Sorry.
please? Because I'm not sure I've understood it. The 2021-22 is the one that was put to us at the budget meeting back in November.
no,
Is that correct?
no, the 2020-21 was submitted for consideration at the budget meeting, but they'd used the wrong form. Then I went back to Liss Heart Charity Trust after the meeting, advised them that because it was in the 30th September closing date, they needed to submit. So at that point, he put in a 2021-22 as a 2021-22 ad hoc budget application.
I'm sorry, I'm being very thick on this.
Yeah, you've lost me as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
I
if we ignore the 2020,
let's ask a simple question. Which, these two items, which year do they come out of?
they were submitted after the November meeting, but the 2021-22 application, that's the one on top,
Yeah.
submitted for consideration in after the 1st of April 21.
Yes. So that's to come out of this year's money.
Ad hoc money, yes.
Yeah, for this year. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that's the one we,
and the other ones to come out of ad hoc money for last year.
Yes.
okay. So that almost the second one is a year
Late.
in arrears. Is backdated a year.
Yeah.
The previous. Yeah. Okay. As long as I understand it, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll consider them. And my first instinct is that they do really good work and that we should consider the grants. My area of concern is that the ad hoc grants are supposed to show that things have changed during the year, and this doesn't do that necessarily. So thoughts, anyone?
I'm minded to look more. I've got to be honest, although it's looking backwards, which I wouldn't normally want to do.
Mhm.
I'm minded to look more favourably on the 2020-21 one than I am on the 21-22 one. And my reasoning behind that is that for the whole of the 2020-21 year, the shop, which is their main source of income, has been closed. And therefore, I can see that they have probably suffered a substantial drop in their income with that shop being closed, because they do raise a lot of money through that shop. However, for the current year, at the moment, I find myself, I can't support it because the shop will be reopening again. I suspect that the good people of this will go back and spend money in that shop. And therefore I suspect their income for this year will probably be pretty much back to normal. And even if it isn't, I would suggest I would look more favourably on a ad hoc application closer towards the end of the year when it's a clearer picture of what their income for the current year actually is. But I have no problem at all with approving the one for 2020-21 because I think that they most certainly would have suffered a big drop in their income.
Yeah, sounds completely reasonable to me. Anybody else? Howard? Sorry, Howard
Yeah,
was first,
yeah.
Nick.
Am I first?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you. Yes, I listened to what Keith's saying, and probably strictly speaking, that's the correct argument. However, I think, as Claire said, they do valuable work for the village, and any money goes into providing for the village economy, any profit they make. So I feel inclined in this case to support both.
Okay, thanks, Howard. Nick?
Well, if I could just be, first of all, could I just, for clarification, have we historically given them grants, or is this a new?
No.
Yeah, okay. And we wanted new applications. I suppose I feel two things as devil's advocate. Firstly, other charities in the village have applied to East Hampshire District Council and received generous grant funding because they weren't able to open. I'm right, aren't I, Keith?
Well, they've received their business rate funding, yeah.
Yeah, I work for a charity that received quite generous COVID relief.
I'd sort of like to feel assured that we weren't the first port of call for that purpose, because we are just the parish council with limited grant funding. The other point, and I am being devil's advocate deliberately, is that the NHS has been, frankly, quite generously funded, and will be far more so because of all the promises the government have made. And I would have quite liked to have seen a bit more detail about what the essence of what they're adding to what would in any case be provided. And maybe I'm just being too hard-hearted, but I just feel there's not very much in the application to help me with that.
Oh, okay, well, I can help you with that bit, Nick. What they do, they provide the defibrillators, which are in the public locations, like outside the British Legion, outside the church. I'm trying to think where the other,
Doctor's surgery.
Yeah, in Tesco's, Newman Collard. Trying to think where the others are now, but there are quite a few scattered around the village.
Yeah.
And they provide those, and to be fair to them as a charity, they provided those with totally from their own funds that they raised. So they didn't receive any public grants for any of those at all.
Yeah, the instance of CPR without a defib machine actually working on somebody is about 5%, and that increases to nearly 40% with a defib machine. So it's a really good thing having them dotted about the place.
I think you're both very good advocates, and if the application had said, if you give us £1,000, we will not only be able to maintain the existing defibrillators for the benefit of villagers, but also buy 1.3 new defibrillators, I would have been more convinced. It's just a bit.
Can I say something?
Of course.
You know the limit of the grant application form, it's under review. They raise about 17,500 a year from the shop who maintain and operate the defibrillators. That includes those in doctors' surgeries, all that income from the shop. With the shop closing for that year, that income has totally removed, although the expenditure is still required. So I expect they had some reserves, I think it was about 10,000. I expect the reserves are severely stretched, if not completely gone. So
do we know if they applied for any of the EHDC COVID relief funding?
I don't know. I don't know, because it's as charity trustees, isn't it? They would get it from the business, yes. So that would be 10,000 plus about a further 6,000. So even if they did get all the COVID support, they would still be in shortfall from their expenditure, although they've got that reserve. So I don't know what grants they have received.
Thanks, Liz.
I think they would have automatically got £10,000 as a business tax, a business rates taxpayer. And that wasn't something they had to apply for. It was just sent automatically.
Depends on whether they get the enhanced voluntary relief for charities. The charities tend not to pay very much in the way of council tax anyway, because the HDC give relief to charities. I know I had to apply for it. It wasn't hard and I was accepted quite easily, but we did have to apply.
I mean, I know Derek Williams, who runs it, who signed the forms. Actually, he's very on top of things like that. So I suspect he would have applied for it because he's very, very savvy on money.
Yeah. And another argument for saying yes is that we invited people to apply. Just being the opposite of Nick's devil's advocate there.
Yeah, no, I agree. So when we were looking at when the applications that we had that came in on time, and we looked at those back in November, those were for which year?
For payments after the 1st of April 21.
Those were for this year, but we're now in. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm now just going to switch 180 degrees. So on the basis of what I've heard about the value they added, I'd be inclined to go for both years.
I was going to say, my suspicion is that if this was the first time they'd applied, they suddenly realised, oh, we could have applied for last year as well. And that's probably
I think that might be a little cruel on them, Howard. I think probably last year did hit them really hard. Because say that, I mean, as we said, they get something like 17,000 a year from the good people that really threw the shop, and of course they haven't had that at all. So
yeah, I mean, I go back to what I said before. It's money that their surpluses go to help the village.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I thought they did some training as well of people to use the defibrillators.
They do when they put the defibrillators in. Yeah.
And so I'm with Nick, as I said before. I think we give them both.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to play hardball on it. So if everyone's happy to give them both, I'll concede and do them both.
So, sorry.
They could be encouraged in any future years where they might choose to apply to get the application in on time and to just give us a bit more of a feel of what the added value for, what is our grant funding going to buy for the community.
Okay.
All right. So, do we need to take a vote on this?
I suppose we should, shouldn't we?
All right. So, can I have a motioner to accept both grant applications from the Lisshart Charities Fund?
I'll do that. I'm happy to propose it.
Thanks, Howard. And a seconder, Nick. All those in favour of paying both grants? Opposed?
Okay.
Motion carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so now the very exciting financial regulations. I reviewed the current Liss Parish Council financial regulations as adopted in October 2016 against the NALC financial regulations issued in 2019 and made a load of annotations on the NALC forms where they differ to the Liss Parish Council ones. And initially, my instinct was the Liss Parish Council regulations offer a greater level of control. I mean, except in a few places here and there, less than a dozen of them, they're identical. But in a few places, the Liss Parish Council ones offer a greater level of financial control. And my first instinct was that we readopt the List Parish Council ones as they are, barring some housekeeping. But I now have a couple of little notes that I think we should consider. Firstly, one of the items of housekeeping across the whole document is to find any instance where it says chairman and replace it with chair, as we are now gender neutral.
Yeah.
On page 2, item 1.8.
Are we just looking at the list ones here? There.
Yeah, we're looking at the list ones.
Okay, yeah.
Page 2, item 1.8. The last sentence says the clerk has been appointed as RFO for this council and these regulations will apply accordingly. Now that's obviously changed now that the clerk and the RFO are different people. So I think we should remove that sentence.
Yeah.
Then on page 6, item 3.4 under annual estimates, budget and forward planning. The first sentence ends, the first sentence says that we have to fix the precept, and the sentence ends that it's to be levied for the ensuing financial year, not later than by the end of January each year. Sarah has asked if we can replace end of January each year with the EHDC deadline, because that varies and it's not always the end of January.
So what number's that?
3.4.
3.4, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's difficult to say. Special request of the clerk.
Yeah, I'm in sympathy with that that request. However, we're a bit at the whim of East Hants, and the whim of East Hants has been in the past, I don't know whether it is at the moment, that they wanted him by the end of December. And, you know, I don't think they do their own by that. So I think what I would like to see is some wording, have East Hants there, and then failing that by the end of January. I think, you know, we should have a two-stage thing. I'm not completely happy with being 100% controlled by East Hants.
How about if we say by EHDC, you know, by the EHDC deadline or the end of January, whichever is later, or would we get ourselves into trouble?
Well, that means the end of January, I think.
Well, I don't know. It has been later, Howard. It was later this year, I think.
That's not. I'm happy to go with the spirit of what Sarah says, but I think we ought to give ourselves a little wiggle room. That's really what. And A or B doesn't do that. An A or B just means you have to do it by the latest.
What do you think, Liz?
I think it's good to have a definite date so that you can manage the workload, and the meetings for approval of the precept request. Says me managing workload. Previously, it's been the end of January because that's typically when the collecting authorities, precepting authorities have put those numbers forward to their own budgeting process. It has come back a little bit earlier, but within limit, they generally can accept a later submission up to the end of January. I would suggest you say the January meeting of the council, maybe.
How does everybody else feel about that?
I'm a little bit reluctant to do something that is not in the spirit of what Sarah has requested. I would prefer wording like we should aim to do it by the date set by EHDC. Aim as a priority to do what's done by EHDC, but definitely do it by the end of January.
Nick?
Can I just understand Sarah's motivation? Because at the moment it says not later than by the end of January. If EHDC were requiring it to be earlier, say by the end of December, that is a different requirement, not in our regulations. That's an external requirement. If, however, the motivation was that if EHDC said by the end of February, and it would allow us extra time, then I could see the point of amending the regulation. But otherwise, end of January is the long stop, with EHDC occasionally coming in and saying, or often coming in and saying, no, it's got to be by the end of December. In which case, it's not to do with our regulation. That's an external requirement.
Yeah. Sarah doesn't mention what her motivation is.
She's being accurate to the practice. That's what she's doing. She's reflecting.
Could we change the beginning of that sentence to say the council shall aim to fix the precept blah 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 by the EHDC deadline? It's very vague.
But is the EHDC deadline an instruction to us?
Yes, it is.
So it's an external requirement which is not to do with our financial regulations. These are our regulations for us, aren't they? And we're saying, come what may, it's got to be done by the end of January. But something may come saying, oh no, you've got to do it by mid-November or by the 3rd of January, in which case we're being dictated to by an external authority. So I sympathise with what Sarah's saying, but I'm not entirely convinced it's necessary.
So we leave it as it is.
I'm tempted to say leave it as it is, yeah, because I mean it does say not later than. So if their date was earlier, then it still falls within that actually, because it's not later than. So yeah.
I mean, what we've done for quite a number of years now, because it was the case that East Ends used to demand that we got it in by the end of December. And what we've done is sort of had our finance committee in October or early November in time for the proposal to be put to November Council. And then at November Council, we've left it on the table for a month so that people can have a think at it. And I think I can only think of one case where somebody came back in December and suggested a change to the budget, which we did. And then it gets into EHDC by the end of December. But there was one year when we did have a problem, and I can't remember what it was. And EHDC, I think, quite happily allowed us to be a bit late.
Okay. So we'll leave the. So we'll.
Is it for this committee to decide, or for the council to decide?
The council will ratify the regulations based on our recommendation.
Would it be fair to ask our chair of this committee to reflect what we've been discussing to Sarah, and if you as chair are convinced that we need to amend it, to make that amendment and then get it ratified by council. The last thing I would ever want to do is to make life more difficult for the officers of this council, because they have enough time anyway getting everything done. So if not later than the end of January isn't sufficient for whatever reason, and I don't understand what that reason is, then I'd be happy to go along with what she's suggesting.
Okay, so
yeah, I'll support that argument.
Thank you. So for the purposes of this conversation, we'll leave it as it is, and I'll have a conversation with Sarah about if she's comfortable with it, or if she really, really wants it to be changed, and see if we can get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
So further down on page 6, item 4.1, the second and third bullet points, and again, this is by special request of the clerk. Sarah has asked if the second bullet point can be changed to say a duly delegated committee of the council for items over £1,000. And then similarly, the third bullet point be increased to £1,000, just to fill the circle. And Sarah's reasoning behind this is sometimes things cost more than £500 and they need to be done, and we end up relying heavily on using the needs of the immediate needs of the parish council to almost circumvent this rule, and she'd be more comfortable with £1,000. And I'm inclined to agree with her. It just causes a bit of a ball and chain around her ankle, not being able to do what she needs to do without having to go through 3 rounds of committee meetings to get to it. Sorry, Nick, you wanted to say something?
Well, I wanted to speak in support of it, as I think I stimulated this intervention from Sarah, because we've had a couple of instances on the facilities side of things where we found it very awkward having this limit of 500. And in one case, just to give an example, we had a quote to do something for 500 and tuppence or something. No, it was a bit more than tuppence. It was something more than 500. And the way to get it done quickly was to ask the supplier, out of the goodness of its heart, to reduce it to 500. And I didn't feel very good about that. Personally, I feel a duly delegated committee or the clerk and either of those 2 chairmen should be trusted to spend up to 1,000. I don't know when it was last reviewed, the actual limit, but this is an opportunity as we are reviewing the regulation. So I would certainly like to support this proposal.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, I would support raising them to 1,000. I must admit, I think it would make sense. Howard?
Yes, I would support that. But I would make one comment that over the years, experience is that very often when you want to spend a lot of money, it's predictable that it might occur between council meetings. And what we've done at the first of the 2 council meetings that it will be between is to organise the chair of the council, the vice chair of the council, and the chairman of the finance committee to actually make a decision. We put a limit on it, so it might be we authorise them to spend up to 10,000 or whatever, and that does seem to work when it's a predictable sum.
Yeah, these things tend to be day-to-day running of the parish council, where things just need to be done and decisions have to be made, and quite a lot of it is time limited. Waiting 6 weeks for another full council meeting, or 3 months for another finance committee meeting, or even for a facilities meeting becomes a hindrance rather than a help. And they're items that have been approved in a budget already. So up to £1,000, giving Sarah the freedom to make those decisions and get on with it, I think would be a good thing for the parish council.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I've no problem with changing the 500 to 1,000.
Fab.
But I'm just saying, without that, if somebody wants 2,000, then it's predictable. And it's not that those 3 people have to get together in a meeting. In practical terms, the chair of the council normally rings the other 2 or emails the other 2 and it comes back yes, because they're always reasonable requests.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we'll absolutely consider making more use of. Thanks, everyone. So on page 7, item
So are we
5 points.
proposing and seconding that?
I will propose and get somebody to second everything as a whole when we get to the end of the document, rather than doing each individual change, if that's right.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Do you want to put a light on, Liz? I imagine you can't actually see the paper you're looking at.
I can, but I will put a light on. Okay.
Oh, there be lights.
Yay.
I had a very long running work Zoom in the winter that started at about 2 o'clock when it was still light, and it finished after 6. So it was dark, and there was 4 people in the Zoom who didn't turn on any lights at all. So they were just black screens at the end of it. It was madness. I think one of them actually nodded off. Anyway, item 5.2 on page 7. The RFO shall prepare a schedule of payments requiring authorization forming part of the agenda of the meeting. Can we change agenda in that sentence to papers? Because the RFO schedule of payments is part of the papers of the council meeting rather than the agenda itself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Agreed. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, on page 9, item 6.3, the drafting says all payments shall be effected by cheque or other instructions to the council's bankers. Can we change that to all payments shall be effected by cheque, bank transfer or other instructions? Just because very, very few payments get made by cheque nowadays, and almost all of them are bank transfers.
Why don't we put bank transfer on a check to show how incredibly
Yeah.
Yeah, swap the order around. Yeah, put bank transfers first.
Cool.
or brackets on check if the government still allows checks to be used.
Oh, yeah,
So,
contactless payment or
feeble joke at this time of the evening.
yes. Okay.
I don't think we should have contactless payments in there because
I was just
what
kidding.
I've noticed is they just put the amount and they don't say where you've spent it.
Don't they?
That's my bank. You use it and you get some in it. So if you've spent £35 and you think, where did I spend £35?
That's so bizarre. I can't remember the last time I paid for anything by cash. It's been more than a year. And my statements always tell me the vendor.
But it's, if you use the contactless thing, my credit card for the contactless thing, they don't seem to, I've only done it once or twice and I didn't like it, but they didn't seem to say who it was. So I even if I'm within the limit, I still put my card in and put my secret number.
No.
I must admit, my bank statement shows who it is, but I must admit though, I agree with Claire. I mean, the only person I pay by cash now is my gardener. I think everybody else is.
I think we should probably ban jokes from the council business.
So I ban what?
Jokes.
We should ban,
Jokes.
wasn't contact us a joke, or was that
Oh, I was joking.
yes.
Sorry. Right, moving on.
Otherwise,
So-
we might have a reputation for being frivolous.
Sorry, it's been a very long day. Okay, item 6.7. Sarah has asked if the drafting in 6.7 has been repeated in 5.6, which, if you want to see it, is on page 8, so just the previous page. And what 5.6 says is that anything that's being paid by direct debit, the clerk and the RFO will set out a schedule of payments of what the direct debits are and will issue them at the first council meeting of the year. So what 6.7 says, I think, is how you go about setting up a new direct debit. So I think that they're slightly different things. So
I agree, but the bank mandate is also 3 signatories.
Yeah.
So it needs to be 3.
and that on the third line, it says are signed by 2 members and any payments are reported to the council as made. I think that 2 should say 3, because, you know, by all rights, the bank shouldn't accept any direct debit mandates that we send to them that are not signed in accordance with the bank mandate. But just to double tick our own processes. Okay, so item 6.18, which is on page 11. The last sentence says the fuel card used by the groundsman will be used for refueling the council vehicle registered it only, and the RFO will reconcile the monthly charge with invoices for correctness and accuracy. The fuel card has since been cancelled, so can we delete that sentence?
So delete
the fuel card.
The fuel card.
We don't have a fuel card anymore.
Oh, okay.
And item 6.20 is about how to use corporate cards and trade card accounts. Sarah has asked that a corporate credit card is applied for, seeing as it's allowed under the regulations. And she's also asked that the last sentence is deleted where it says personal credit or debit cards for members of staff shall not be used under any circumstances. It's impractical.
Yeah, we've actually been breaching our own regulation for quite a while then.
Yeah.
I would change that from shall not be used, so should not normally be used.
I think I would just remove that sentence altogether. I don't see a need for it.
Yeah. They're used all the time, regularly.
Mm.
And again, I think that comes back to the same thing we were just talking about, actually, about contactless payments, isn't it? Is you know, several years ago, well, probably over a year ago, things like newspapers in Tesco would have been paid for by cash, whereas now they're almost certainly paid for by card. So
what we could do is to turn it around to a positive and say, where members of staff you have to use their personal credit or debit card or pay in cash, these amounts will be funded forthwith, or as soon as reasonably practicable, or something to show that we recognise that sometimes they're out of pocket and that they should be reimbursed.
It's already covered in the expenses policy.
Okay, I didn't know that. I should have read it.
It's all right. Join the review committee. It's a barnstormer.
So in that case, I would say that sentence should indeed come out. I would agree. Can I just
Marvellous.
Just say that in terms of someone who used to do a lot of drafting of things, putting something in square brackets implies that it's still a matter of debate. Is that does it mean by the clerk or the RFO, or is it something we haven't really decided on?
I think it's just a manifest issue where the drafting of item 6.20 was taken from a model version of these regulations, and the square brackets weren't removed.
So now that we're going to have a corporate credit card, once it's been applied for and provided, what is our policy?
well, I think the square bracket should be removed because it wants to be the clerk and the RFO, doesn't it? I would think.
Yeah, agreed.
Are you going to include the assistant clerk?
I think we probably should.
Probably should, yeah.
Yeah, I think the main thing is to ensure that, and I don't know whether this is spelled out somewhere. Is it someone sort of has a check through of the payments, reasonably frequently, so that if we ever had a rogue part, just for example, it would be picked up by the RFO, or if we had a rogue RFO who was busily spending all the reserves, it would be picked up jolly quickly.
Yeah. Yes.
It does, sorry, it doesn't, of course, happen in this parish council, but it does happen in other organisations.
Oh yeah, all the time.
In my former family business, where the accountant got a gambling addiction and defrauded the company of something like £80,000. But because he was the accountant, no one picked it up. Serious.
Yeah, you have to trust your accountant. So shall we make the drafting of this specifically restricted by the clerk, the assistant clerk, and the RFO,
Yeah, I think so.
or the RFO
And
to
or,
give
yeah.
options, and then delete the last sentence?
My serious point is to ask, what is the system for checking these payments from time to time?
I imagine in the normal course of doing the finances, they'll be checked thoroughly every single month in exactly the same way all of the rest of the expenses and are.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not wanting to make a meal of this, but this is, with these other things, what we're talking about, I suppose they could do it by bank transfer as well. It's just, we're talking about the financial regulations. I'm just interested to know, as a committee member, what system we have to catch up with any fraudulent activity reasonably quickly.
You've got payments forward to every monthly council meeting, which records the payments and approves the payments. There is the bank reconciliation, which takes place, and I think elsewhere is quarterly reviewed by the council officer. Okay, that's fallen down. You've got the internal auditing, which takes place 3 times a year, where they're provided for.
And with those things in place, sorry, Liz.
Okay, you could ask for the account balance of the credit card, because it's an unusual item, to be included in the RFO report, so that they can see the transactions actually taking place.
I think that should absolutely be included. It's part of the list of payments, so it shouldn't be just the credit card bill. It should be itemized every single month.
Yes, it's the copy of the statement from the credit card.
Yeah.
So I suppose what I feel, having had that discussion, is that the spending should be done by the clerk or the assistant clerk, so that the RFO is protected from any possibility that they would be both spending and checking.
Yeah, that's an option.
Yeah.
There is also the
yeah.
segregation of duties is a fantastic thing, but in an organisation as small as the parish council, it's not always possible. I agree with you that it is the gold standard, but it might not be practical.
Well, up to now it has been. We haven't had it. So I mean, my proposal would be it should say the clerk and the assistant clerk, because I would like to think that the RFO is not going to be compromised by possibly be spending and checking their own expenditure.
Fair enough. I'm comfortable with that. Is everybody else happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Liz. Item 6.22 at the bottom of page 11. Sarah has said that petty cash is not kept in the office anymore, and that the entire clause should be deleted because petty cash isn't being used at all.
Okay.
And
it will come back. It will come back, petty cash. No, you want to delete it?
Well, Sarah wants to delete it.
She's the biggest user of petty cash.
Again, I presume it's probably because she's using her own cards now.
All right, why don't we leave it then?
I think
It's
we
not
leave
doing
it in the
anyone any
feed, yeah.
harm.
I recommend you leave it. Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's it. That is all of the changes that have been requested, other than a bit of housekeeping in accordance with some of the policies that we have been reviewing in the review committee lately, where you tack on a review date and a next review date. But have a word with Lizzie about what that kind of housekeeping should look like. So with all of that in mind, can I have somebody who would propose those changes as discussed? Nick? Anybody seconding it? Howard, thank you. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carried.
Wonderful.
Sorry, I just missed who proposed it. I got Howard seconded it. Who proposed it, sorry?
Nick.
Nick.
Could I just say, Chair, we are indebted to you for the thoroughness with which you've been through. Thank you.
It appeals to the obsessive compulsive part of my nature, so I was happy to do it. Okay, so item 7, which curiously looks like 17 on my agenda. Item 7 is to review and adopt clause 2.1 of the financial risk assessment, which says, has the council formally adopted standing orders and financial regulations and the dates approved? I say yes, we have. Does anybody have any comments to make?
No.
Is this the Jackie Weaver item? On my T-shirt.
You should have done.
I think it looks admirable.
Can I have a proposer, please?
Yeah.
Nick, seconder. Keith?
Yeah.
All those in favour?
Yeah.
Opposed? Marvellous. Thank you very much. And finally, to consider the Listen Bloom accounts. And I'll pass over to Liz again, because I've been talking a lot.
Okay. The reason this was done is because there's been an ongoing discussion about funds available to Listen Bloom, the team who does all the village planting for Liss. And there's been a bit of concern that monies arising from fundraising will perhaps not being credited to them. Margaret Effenberg kindly provided me with a very detailed spreadsheet. So basically what I did was compared her figures with what's actually been gone through the parish council accounts to look at in detail. The first thing is that before I started, an email was sent by Dick Bowery saying that LPC is holding £1,569 in monies for Listen Bloom for the next financial year. That was after the 1st of April 2019. Now, he did actually send this. It was perhaps a little bit vaguely phrased, but that gave the understanding to the Listen Bloom team that they had a reserve of 1,569. He then included in the accounts for up to 31st of March 2019 that the hanging basket reserve had this amount of money, but the actual Listen Bloom reserve, which was separately included, had a 0 reserve. But then also when I looked back at the accounts through that year, I looked at numbers and it was apparent that was about £785.70 income to Liss Parish Council from fundraising, both by Listen Bloom and from local tradespeople, in recognition of the village planting that was gone out through the village. Now, at least one of these documents said it was specifically for Listen Bloom rather than hanging baskets. So there is a bit of an inaccuracy and vagueness in the accounts as to what income allocated against the Listen Bloom versus the hanging basket reserves as they were previously recorded in the accounts. I've just tried to look at that factually. I've then done a comparison for 2 years from with Margaret's numbers for 2 years, and pretty well they're the same. There's odd bits here and there, but what I have done is base the totals on the numbers for the List Parish Council accounts, and I've gone through them with Margaret, and she's happy with the comparison that I've done. And we've picked out and gone through where there's been any discrepancies, or discrepancies rather, just so that we know where the numbers have gone. Receipts allocated against different things, an order put into Amberol by List Parish Council, which was not advised List in Bloom, just odd things here and there, and figures going to Margaret from different sources. So we are in agreement. I haven't done a calculation of surplus at the end of each year. Now, this is basic because there needs to be a policy decision by the council as how this is approached. So for both 1920 and 2021, List Parish Council agreed a budget of £750 to spend on village planting, as we will call it. In addition to that, there was quite significant fundraising by the List in Bloom team. In 1920, I find the right page in my, I haven't noticed it for a week. The total spend, this is excluding VAT, so this is the cost of the parish council, was 1,414. So we did exceed the budget, but the total receipts, including the budget, were over 1,000. So I would suggest that the surplus in that case all goes to the List in Bloom reserve. In 2020-21, go to the end there. I've got no headings copied just to make it life harder. Obviously, there was much less activity. So again, there was a budget approved of £750, but expenditure was only £260.70 if we include a couple of late invoices, which I have in the accounts from Sue Jordan. So we didn't exceed the 750 budget, but there was still fundraising from List in Bloom of the order about just over £100. So I'm suggesting on this occasion, only the fundraising surplus goes over to the List in Bloom reserve. Does that make sense?
Yep. So our mission here this evening is to decide how much of the historic List in Bloom / village planting surpluses we recommend to full council be ring fenced in an allocated reserve that will be theoretically managed by List in Bloom. They will be able to manage the amount of money that they're spending and the amount that they're receiving. And while it will be incorporated within the List Parish Council's accounts, they'll have slightly more sight and control over how the money is spent.
So if we start from 1819, you could suggest that the total fundraising budget of 785.70 goes forward into the reserve. Then rather than the 1569, which Dick was talking about, which is sort of included a budget amount anyway, for 2021, the surplus amount of about 1,471 goes forward. Then for 2021, only £116.16 goes forward.
Yeah.
So what's the total of all of those?
All of those together, I've absolutely no idea. 8,570. I haven't done surplus amounts for that one. 750. It's of the order of 2,350 would go forward as a reserve, but that really reflects fundraising surplus rather than surplus of unspent budget.
My opinion is that they should be allowed to keep their fundraising surplus as well as their unspent budget surplus.
Okay.
Do you want to say something, Nick, or are you just resting?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I would support. We're in a transition. The problem is we don't know what we're transitioning to. But I think, I mean, listen, Bloom, with support from Jenny, recruiting new volunteers. We've had discussions with them about the fact that they would like a variety of talents and skills. Hopefully, in the discussions that Roger is proposing with them, we'll come to an agreement where they do meaningfully manage their budget, but we look after it for them. I think that's the sort of deal we're going to offer. And my instinct is we should be generous in terms of the sort of endowment, not least because we can be at the moment, but that we should, I don't know what regime they've been operating under in terms of getting their grants, but they shouldn't be getting grants automatically. They should actually present a case to us each year for what they need, bearing in mind that they are also fundraising. Now, they might then say to us in the discussions that we're planning to have, well, what criteria should we apply to what we should fundraise for, and what we expect should it be reasonable to expect the parish council to pay on behalf of the village as a whole. But my feeling is, on the whole, we should be being more rather than less generous, because they are doing it for the village in ways that are very evident to the village, and we certainly wouldn't want this parish council staff doing it rather than the volunteers that do it. So I think I'm supporting what our chair has just said. Roll over both the fundraising surplus and what we have set aside each year.
Can I add that I suppose the day-to-day on the ground management of this is going to fall to the facilities committee, and it might be useful.
No, Roger isn't convinced of that.
It might, certainly for budget setting, and it might be useful if Bliss and Bloom gave a schedule of what kind of work they were anticipating in a future year, in the next 12 months at a particular point of a year, and how much they think that they're going to be spending on it, and how much they think that they're going to achieve in fundraising. Just 5 lines worth of where they think they're going to be for the next 12 months would be enormously useful to the facilities committee, who will be the gatekeepers a bit, I think.
I think whoever is the gatekeeper, it's a great suggestion. I think Roger was being kind to me at the time. He said, because he thought that we were doing too many things. But wherever it ends up that those decisions are made.
Yeah.
And of course, facilities doesn't tend to make funding decisions. It has to refer elsewhere to get approval for funding the sector. So I would have thought it was either finance or PRG, but
You've just inherited 3 shiny new members of the facilities committee. You're going to have to put them to work.
3?
Is it 3? Or is it just 2?
2.
Yeah, fair enough.
Let's
anyway, we digress.
It's just a way of streamlining it.
I've got a streamlining for you. I propose that we suggest to the full council that £2,350 is ring-fenced in the parish council's reserves as an allocated reserve for use by Bliss and Bloom. Does that streamline it enough?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. I
Does
agree.
that work, Liz?
That works with respect to agreeing the reserve. I'm thinking about the process of approving spend by Listen Bloom each year.
I imagine that is going to be something that will happen in exactly the same way as all of the other expenditure happens.
I was just thinking they're a group of volunteers, so they have a budget, which at the moment is £750. I was suggesting that they, at the first council meeting of the year, requested an initial release of some of that reserve straight away, so that they could increase the LPC budget by releasing some of their fundraising raised allocated reserve. And then that goes forward, and only when that's exhausted does it then need to go back to facilities or finance or whatever committee or even council to release more reserve monies.
Okay.
I don't think we can decide this because this is a matter for discussion between the council and,
Listen Bloom.
I mean, the aim is for them as to be, as I understand it, Keith will correct me if I'm wrong, but for them to be as self-managing as possible, which should, I suspect, mean that they have to have a formal constitution, you know, with the treasurer and so on. But we, for the moment, look after money. Frankly, I don't see why they shouldn't be like Listmen's Shed, have their own bank account and act as a pretty independent body, not necessarily.
There are insurance implications.
Mm.
They're under the List Parish Council banner because they fall into our insurance.
There's also only 3 of them, and they're getting.
They've got something like 14, I think, volunteers before the latest recruitment drive. I'm hoping that amongst the new volunteers there will be some who might be potential succession candidates for running the thing.
Yeah. I'm a little bit concerned about releasing lump sums of money to Listen Bloom with no backup or paperwork to go with it, other than Listen Bloom have asked for it, and we can only really pay for invoices.
No, that's what I'm saying. You can only pay for invoices within a budget unless you go to council. So what I'm saying is that rather than limiting their budget to 750, there's an approval of release of reserve into the budget at the beginning of the year, say another 250. So they have £1,000, which then can be processed through without having to go to council and approved in the standard way for invoice paying. Obviously, all monies are paid based on the invoicing or directly to LUFs, for example. As much is paid directly as possible so that we can clearly claim VAT back for it.
Yeah.
But rather than just being limited to 750, if they put a schedule forward which says they expect to spend 1,000, we release reserve at the beginning of the year straight away so they can go through without having to go back to council.
Okay, sounds reasonable. So the proposal is that we transfer £2,350 from our general reserve into an allocated reserve for Listen Bloom, and ask the full council if we can release £1,000 of that at the beginning of each year, subject to Listen Bloom budgets for expenditure during that year.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
250 to add to the 750.
Yeah, 250 to add to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So can I have a seconder, a proposer for that, please? Even though I just proposed it. Thanks.
I'm happy to propose that.
Keith, seconder, please. Nick, all those in favour?
Yeah.
Opposed? Passed. Okay. So will you work up some wording that will make me sound eloquent when I propose that to the full council? Thank you. The last item on the agenda before any other business. Oh, sorry, Nick.
Just before we leave that item, to ask Liz, you've obviously been in detailed discussion with Margaret. Will that be greeted positively, that decision?
I would hope so. I think Margaret would be there. I think there is a strong understanding that there was over 1,500 before the end of 1819, which I'm not proposing is all carried forward. But go from there.
2,350 as a starting point is not
Yeah,
a bad way to go.
Yeah, no, knowing the ladies, I would have thought they'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, the key point is that there's nothing that they were raised from fundraising which we are depriving them of.
Yes.
In fact, what we're doing is we're also allowing them to keep some of the funding that we provided, which wasn't used.
Yeah.
I think it's important, in a way, we minute it to demonstrate that we've gone beyond, what the minimum was.
Okay.
Marvelous. Right. So item 8 is to receive report on the new accounting software. So is there anything you want to add, Liz, to anything that you mentioned in item 4?
To 9. The intention was to complete the 2021 accounts on the Omega system. The auditor was suggesting that I didn't do that and started fresh from the 1st to 21, but I said I wanted to try and do that. I'm not going to succeed doing that. What I'm suggesting is that I've done up more works. The main problem I've got is the complication of the transfers between the charity and the parish council against each invoice. And there's a lot of work and I just haven't had time to do it. So what I'm suggesting is that I establish a clear process for starting the accounts for the 1st of April 21 on the Omega system and continue with the 2020-21 on the Excel spreadsheet accounts which I prepared.
Yeah, if the accounts that are going to be audited at the end of March 2021 are going to be audited based on the Excel spreadsheets, I would agree with that. While it's nice to have the dual run, there's a limited amount of time available to people to do it, and doing a take on as of the 1st March of the balances and then starting fresh might be the best way to go. Also gives the new RFO when she starts the option to learn as she goes. It becomes a bit more of a training exercise than here you go, here's a thing, have assets. So I'm comfortable with that. Does anybody else have any comments they'd like to make?
No, I think that's a sensible approach.
Yep. Howard?
I think your joint judgment, given that I don't know what I wouldn't know what I was talking about.
Account systems are good. Anything else, Liz?
No.
Which brings us to any other business. So, Keith, any other business?
No.
Nick?
Could we just have a quick staffing item when we have stopped YouTube?
Great.
Sure. Any other business for this meeting?
I've got something, but I think perhaps if are we talking about formally having an exempt session when we finished, or are we talking about just an informal chat?
I don't know. Nick, would you like an exempt session or would you like a chat?
I was just going to ask for some information about an appointment.
So just a chat.
Okay, I will say I'll say this now. Some people are aware that some years ago, the clerk of Whitehill Board and Council borrowed over £200,000 from the council without consulting them. And I was talking subsequently to that, quite a bit subsequently, to the then head of HALC, and the lady from Hauk, who had actually, I believe, discovered the fraud, and they were talking about appointing auditors, and their recommendation was that all auditors should be sorry, that's slipping. All auditors should be appointed by the councillors and not by the staff, or in particular the RFO. And as we're swapping RFO, I think this might be a good time to think about this. And when I say the councils do it, what we tend to do is that the RFO comes to us and says, I think Joe Bloggs would do a good job, and the council support it. But what they meant was that the councillors went out and did the work of identifying the auditors, completely independent of the RFO and the other staff. And I think it's probably a good idea that we should consider doing that.
Certainly, we'll take it under advisement. I'll take away that as an action for something to look into.
Okay.
For what it's worth, I don't think we're in a lot of trouble, because all auditors have an ethical code of conduct that is regulated. They have to audit things at arm's length, and they all have to have a duty of care, or they get themselves into a lot of trouble with the regulatory bodies. But absolutely, I'll go away and do some research, and I'll report back at the next finance committee meeting.
You know far more about that than I do, because I think it's a technical issue.
Yeah, and absolutely, I'll have a look at it.
I think it's very useful, thing for us to be aware of, Howard. Because we can make assumptions about people, as I related earlier in the meeting, and discover to our shock and horror that there's something happening that we would never have predicted. So having a system of checks and balances is really important, and having effective auditors is really very important.
Yeah, it's also not the worst thing in the world to switch auditors around every now and then, because new ones notice things more than old ones. Sometimes if you've had the same auditor for several years, they get a bit complacent. But absolutely, I will do some research, and I will report back at the next finance committee as to what my findings are.
Okay. And
thanks, Howard.
Is this the other thing? Is this Lizzie's last meeting?
It is.
Well, we ought to, I think, formally thank her for her services and wish her good luck for the future.
Thank you. That was going to be my piece of any other business, but
sorry.
That's quite all right.
I'll withdraw that comment in that case.
No. You were the chair of the finance committee for much longer than I've been, so it's only right that it comes from you. Anybody else have any other business?
It's about the abyss that I want to talk when we go off YouTube.
Right. Okay.